You're nothing but a liability to this company, Daniel. Dead weight we've carried long enough. My division head spat into the microphone as the ballroom froze, champagne flutes half raised, the clink of silverware stopping mid-air, laughter dying into a suffocating silence, and every eye in the grand chandelier-lit hall turning toward me as though I were some failed magician caught with empty hands, the lights too bright, the stage too big. His words rang with a rehearsed venom, designed for maximum spectacle, and when a few nervous chuckles rose from the crowd, I felt my stomach twist, but my jaw lock, my face refusing to break into the panic he wanted, because humiliation was a currency I knew he'd spend freely tonight. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, where the air smelled of gasoline from the auto plants, and the people measured a man not by what he owned but by whether he showed up on time, shook your hand firmly, and kept his word. And if there's one thing you should know about me, it's that I built everything I had from that kind of small-town ethic years of grinding mornings, swallowing stale coffee in fluorescent-lit offices, turning down nights out so I could hammer through spreadsheets no one else wanted to touch, giving presentations in boardrooms that smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat until I finally earned my place not just in this company, but in the vision of what it could become. And yet here I was, at the annual holiday gala in a downtown Chicago hotel ballroom, being gutted alive in front of colleagues I had mentored, investors I had courted, and managers who had once toasted to me as the backbone of our growth, while Randall, my division head, a man whose soft hands had never once opened the office before dawn or stayed to clean up the wreckage after midnight, paraded me as his scapegoat, his sacrificial lamb to disguise his own sins. What they didn't know, not Randall, not the smug executives smirking behind their glasses of wine, not even the junior analysts who whispered nervously at their round tables, was that I had already prepared for something like this, that I had a card up my sleeve, a small advantage buried so deep they would never think to look for it until it was far too late, but we'll get there. For now, what mattered was how the ground shifted under me, how the betrayal slithered from something private into something designed to be permanent, unforgettable, seared into my reputation. And the worst part was that I could see the enjoyment in their eyes. Not just Randall, but the CFO, Diane, who had always smiled too brightly when I spoke, as though covering a grudge she could never say aloud, and even Brent, the coup, whose fake laugh I'd ignored in countless meetings, now tilting his glass in a silent toast to my downfall. They accused me of failures, missed revenue targets, bloated project budgets, mismanagement that, according to Randall's slick narrative, I had hidden under layers of false optimism, every line delivered with theatrical pauses, as though he were an actor and I the villain in his play. But I wasn't just shocked. I was studying the details, the way the company-branded coffee mug I'd been holding, the one with the faded logo from our first year, now felt heavy in my hand like some relic of loyalty mocked. The ceramic warm with what little was left of lukewarm brew, and I thought to myself, this mug will mean something again, though none of them know it yet. And as the ballroom echoed with the uneasy mixture of silence, coughs, and hushed whispers, I realized what cut the deepest wasn't just the lies but the betrayal of trust. These were people I had stood up for when investors doubted them, people I had vouched for when the board demanded accountability, people I believed in enough to sacrifice weekends and relationships and pieces of my life I could never get back, only for them to drag me through this spectacle to protect their own rot. But here's the truth. Humiliation, when you survive it, hardens into clarity. It strips away illusions, leaving only what matters. I stood there, letting the weight of their words press against me, let the shame burn my skin. But beneath it all I was already quieting my breath, already imagining the first steps, already deciding that I would not go quietly, that I would not surrender what I had built. Because while they thought they had cornered me, framed me, stripped me of power, they had overlooked something crucial. They had forgotten who I was, where I came from, and what I was capable of when everything I cared about was stolen. And so, while I raised my glass with a faint, controlled smile, as if to toast my own downfall, what I was really doing was silently swearing, this isn't over, not by a long shot, and when it ends, it won't be me lying in ruins. The days after that gala felt like walking through glass barefoot, every step cutting deeper because the company I had poured myself into now looked at me like I was contaminated, as though Randall's words had rewired their memories and erased my years of work. I would pass by colleagues in the glass-walled downtown office and see the hesitation in their eyes, the way they'd lower their voices when I walked past, and even the interns' kids, barely out of college, who once looked at me with awe when I shared stories of 20-hour days building our first successful product, now whispered behind screens as though my name carried a warning. And the strangest part was how quickly loyalty evaporated once someone higher up framed the narrative. Randall moved fast, too fast for it not to have been planned, sending out official memos about structural inefficiencies and leadership realignment. Phrases polished by Diane and Brent that really meant Daniel Cole was out. Daniel Cole was a mistake. Daniel Cole had failed. They stripped my access to certain files. Routine IT policy, they said with flat smiles, but I noticed which ones. Budget sheets, project pipelines, investor communication logs. And I understood instantly. They weren't just burying me. They were scrubbing their tracks, laundering their fraud through the illusion of my incompetence. I pretended not to notice, even forced a small chuckle when IT told me my badge would no longer unlock certain floors, joking that maybe I didn't need the exercise anymore, but inside I memorized every door that shut against me, every wall they thought would block me, and what they didn't know was that months before, when I began to suspect numbers weren't aligning, I had quietly mirrored certain files to a secure drive, encrypted and hidden behind layers they'd never find, because paranoia in corporate America isn't madness, it's survival, and I had seen too many good men swallowed by smiling liars to walk in blind forever. That was my secret advantage, the thing I hinted at, the seed I had planted, and though I couldn't reveal it yet, I carried it like a flame inside me. Still, the humiliation lingered. Every time I entered a meeting now, Randall would accidentally misquote figures, claiming I had inflated projections, and when I corrected him, the room would go silent, as if my voice carried less weight, as if the man who had once been their North Star was now a ghost babbling nonsense. One afternoon, Diane cornered me in the break room, her perfume sharp as lemon rind, her smile stretched too thin, and she whispered, "You should resign gracefully, Daniel. It'll look better on your resume." And the way she said it, like she was doing me a favor, like she hadn't just gutted me in front of the entire company, almost made me laugh. But I bit down hard on my tongue, because showing teeth now would ruin everything. Instead I said, "You might be right," and walked away, letting her believe I was folding, because sometimes letting your enemy think they've won is the sweetest stage of the trap. But make no mistake, the weight crushed me in private. Nights in my apartment overlooking the river turned into long hours staring at the skyline, the lights of other offices still glowing at midnight, wondering if my life's work was really about to be ripped away, if maybe the small-town boy from Dayton had finally been outplayed by the polished elite who had Ivy League connections and family money and friends on the board. There was a moment, just one, when I almost gave in. A recruiter I knew called and said another firm downtown was eager to talk, that I could walk away with dignity and start fresh, and for a split second the idea of shedding the poison appealed to me, but then I remembered the mug, that faded company mug sitting on my desk, the one with the cracked handle I refused to throw away, and I thought, no, this isn't just business, this is personal. This is my blood in those projects, my time, my name, and I won't let them rewrite history by painting me as the villain. And so I tested small moves, subtle ones, a word to a junior analyst here, a question to an old investor there, and one morning, just when I thought maybe the tide could shift, a small victory came. An old client, one of our earliest believers, called me directly to say he trusted me, not the clowns now running interference, and he wanted to know the truth. My chest tightened with hope, like maybe the narrative could fracture, maybe I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to believe. But no sooner had I hung up than the hammer fell. Randall summoned me to a meeting with HR and the CFO. Their faces rehearsed in solemnity, and they laid out a performance review file I had never seen, filled with fabricated complaints, manipulated charts, and forged emails, all pinned to my name. And the worst part was one signature at the bottom of a page, a forged version of my own, sloppily copied but official enough to pass at a glance, tying me to budget approvals that would never withstand audit. I sat there, my mouth dry, the taste metallic like pennies on my tongue, while Diane slid the folder across the table as if it were scripture, and Randall leaned back with that smug tilt of his head, saying, "It's time we face the truth, Daniel. You've done irreparable damage." They thought they had sealed my fate, and for a moment the walls of the glass conference room closed in, my reflection staring back at me like a stranger, but deep inside, beneath the weight of their lies, The flame of my advantage burned hotter, and though my voice trembled when I finally said, "I understand," my silence was not surrender. It was calculation, because if they wanted to tighten the noose, I would let them, and when they pulled it taut, they'd never realize it was looped around their own necks. The audit was announced 2 weeks later, framed as a routine compliance measure in the all-staff memo, but I could see the tremor ripple through Randall's smile when he read it aloud in the Monday meeting, because while the others shifted in their seats and feigned calm, I knew the truth. He and Diane and Brent had been cooking numbers so long the smell of rot was baked into every spreadsheet, and an audit wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a countdown to exposure, and though they thought they had buried me under fabricated failures, they hadn't anticipated how deep I had prepared. Every night after the humiliation at the gala, I had gone home not to wallow, but to build, combing through my encrypted archive, piecing together a timeline of falsified vendor payments, shadow accounts tucked inside shell subsidiaries, and budget approvals that never should have passed, each file like a nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. The irony was that their attempt to forge my signature on bogus documents gave me the missing piece, a pattern too sloppy to be accidental, linking the fraud back to their hands, and I realized then that the mug, the old ceramic coffee mug with the faded logo, wasn't just a relic but a weapon, because inside that mug at my desk, I kept a flash drive, innocuous and overlooked. The same one I'd been quietly feeding for months with data they thought erased, and no one ever questioned a man's coffee mug, not even when they stripped his badge access and audited his files, because symbolism hides in plain sight. But I had to move carefully because they weren't stupid. They were paranoid, and as the audit team arrived, camped in glass-walled rooms with stacks of binders and exhausted expressions, Randall turned up the pressure, circling me like a Volf, making public digs in meetings, sending late-night emails demanding explanations for projects I no longer managed, hoping to push me into a mistake, something they could lock onto as final proof of incompetence. I played along, nodding, apologizing, even volunteering for menial tasks like arranging presentations, my posture deliberately smaller, my voice softer, until the whisper in the office spread that maybe Daniel had broken, maybe the once feared strategist was now just a beaten man waiting for his severance. And I let them believe it, even when it burned. Even when colleagues who once idolized me now patted my shoulder with pity instead of respect. Still, beneath the ashes, small flickers of validation came. An old mentor forwarded me a confidential note, hinting that the board itself was uneasy with how quickly the narrative had shifted, that they were watching closely, and though it wasn't direct support, it was enough to remind me the story wasn't closed. The ticking clock grew louder. The auditors requested every approval tied to my name, which of course included the forged signatures, and when I was summoned to explain, Randall sat smugly across from me as though expecting me to crumble. I didn't. I leaned forward, tapped the documents, and asked calmly if the auditors had compared ink pressure and digital timestamps across the files, because I had noticed inconsistencies. It was subtle, just enough to plant doubt, and I saw the flicker of concern pass over Randall's face before he masked it with a laugh. That was the moment I knew the trap was tightening. Still, they struck back harder. A week before the final audit report, they staged one last humiliation, this time in front of investors, claiming I had mishandled a multi-million-dollar partnership, flashing doctored emails on a projector while Randall said with mock sadness, "This is why leadership transitions are necessary." The investors frowned, murmured, some nodding, some skeptical, and my chest constricted because for a second I feared the lie might hold, but then the smallest detail caught my eye. The timestamp on the forged email, marked on a Saturday when I had been with my father in Dayton, cleaning out his garage. A day I had posted photos on my personal social media, time-stamped, geotagged, undeniable. That was the mini reveal, the proof that their house of cards had a crack, and I tucked it away, silent, waiting for the right moment to pull it like a pin from a grenade. Walking out of that meeting, humiliated yet again, I whispered to myself, one more step, because I could feel the edge, the knife's point where everything collapses not on me but on them. And so the final week before the board's review became a silent war. I moved like a shadow, leaving my mug and its hidden drive on my desk, never drawing attention, while at night I duplicated files, connected dots, and prepared a single devastating package that no spin could erase. They thought they had won, thought they had me in a straitjacket of forged failures, but the truth was that every rope they wrapped around me was already looped back to their own throats, and all I had to do was pull. The boardroom that morning felt colder than usual, as though the air itself had been drained of warmth. The long mahogany table gleaming under recessed lights. The city skyline spread out behind the glass like an audience waiting for a verdict, and I sat near the end with my hands folded, the old mug in front of me like just another piece of clutter, though inside it the flash drive hummed like a secret heartbeat. Randall, Diane, and Brent entered with their polished grins, tailored suits sharp enough to cut glass, radiating the smug certainty of people who believe they've already won, and as the directors shuffled papers and cleared throats, Randall launched into his rehearsed attack, a presentation filled with doctored numbers and falsified timelines, each slide designed to bury me deeper. And I could see the relief on some of the older board members' faces, as though they finally had an excuse to push me aside, to silence the man who had once been indispensable, but was now framed as a liability. They spoke of irreversible damage, of mismanaged leadership, and when one director asked about the suspicious budget approvals tied to my name, Randall smirked and said, "Unfortunately, Daniel's signature is on every one of them." The words landed like stones in the water, heavy and final, and for a moment I let the silence stretch, let the weight of their accusation hang like smoke choking the room, before I reached out, almost casually, and tapped the mug with my fingertip. The faint ceramic clink drawing eyes for just a second before I said, "That's interesting, because when you forge a man's signature, you should at least check where he was that day." Randall's smile twitched, confusion flickering across his face, and I leaned forward, sliding the flash drive from inside the mug like it was nothing more than a pen, plugging it into the projector with steady hands. The screen blinked, and suddenly their slides vanished, replaced by my files unedited, time-stamped, geotagged, layered with metadata that screamed authenticity, and I began to speak, not in anger, but in the calm, deliberate cadence of a man laying out undeniable truth. I showed the Saturday email supposedly from me, paired with photos of me in Dayton with my father, complete with social timestamps, the geotag of a diner receipt, the precise location data embedded in the JPEG's proof, so simple it was devastating. The room shifted, murmurs rising, eyes narrowing, and I pressed on, file after file, exposing the shell accounts Randall and Diane had funneled money into, the fraudulent vendor invoices Brent had signed, the forged approvals that matched not my pen stroke, but Randall's assistant's, sloppily copied and layered over real documents. Every detail was precise, every step tied back to them, and as the board leaned in, expressions hardening, I caught the first bead of sweat trickle down Randall's temple, saw Diane's jaw tighten, saw Brent glance sideways like a man searching for an exit. Then came the first twist, the one even they hadn't seen coming. I revealed that months earlier, when I began noticing anomalies, I had quietly filed a whistleblower protection claim with federal regulators, a move so discreet it left no trail until I activated it, and that as of midnight, the SESIC already had these very files in hand, meaning no cover-up, no quiet dismissal, no golden parachute could save them now. The silence was absolute, the kind that vibrates in your bones, and then one director, an older man who had once been skeptical of me, muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath, as he realized what this meant. Randall tried to recover, stammering about misinterpretations and malicious framing. But before he could finish, I delivered the second twist, the dagger. Not only had they tried to frame me, but they had underestimated my reach, because the investor who had called me weeks earlier, the one who said he trusted me, was more than a client, he was a close friend of the chairman of the board, and I had already walked him through every detail. The chairman himself sat now at the head of the table, quiet until this moment, when he finally leaned forward and said, "Randall, Diane, Brent, we'll handle this from here." Their faces collapsed in real time, the confident masks dissolving into panic, and I knew it was over. Security was called minutes later, their protests echoing down the hallway like the cries of children caught red-handed, and as the boardroom emptied, I stayed seated, the mug still in front of me, my hand resting lightly on it like a man holding not just ceramic, but the symbol of every hour, every sacrifice, every betrayal turned into justice. And here's the poetic part, the mug they had mocked me for, The mug that had been invisible to them because they thought power lived only in presentations and titles became the vessel of their downfall, the object that carried the truth they thought erased. And when I finally stood, I took it with me, not as a trophy but as a reminder that loyalty and trust, once broken, can still be weaponized if you have the patience to wait. Walking out of that glass tower into the crisp Chicago air, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not triumph exactly, but release, the uncoiling of a knot inside me, the realization that while they had stolen my reputation temporarily, I had reclaimed something far greater. My voice, my dignity, my control over the story. They lost their careers, their reputations shredded across headlines within days as the audit's findings went public. While I, protected by my whistleblower status, was not only cleared but quietly courted by competitors who admired my resilience. But here's the truth I want you to feel. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about balance, about resetting the scale they thought was fixed against you. And as I drove back to Dayton weeks later, the mug in my coup folder, the highway stretching endless under gray skies, I thought of my father's voice reminding me that a man is measured not by what is done to him but by how he answers it. And in that moment, with the world behind me and the weight gone from my chest, I smiled. Not because they were ruined, but because I was free. If you enjoyed this story, please give a thumbs up to the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful true life stories.